Hi, and welcome to Dockside with Deb. In this weekly show, we'll talk to people who are doing some pretty cool things in sailing and experts in their field. I'm Deborah Diel, sailor, founder of MySail, and your host for today. Dockside with Deb is recorded live, so you can join in and ask your own questions. To find out more, head to mysail.team/Dockside with Deb. Let's get started. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. So I'd like to welcome Mark Turnbull to this episode of Dockside with Deb. And instead of me trying to give your background, I've kind of transitioned this, so we'll let you introduce yourself, Mark. And so let's just start. If you could give us a little bit of an overview of your background.
Okay, let me start, I guess, with the highlight. So I competed at the Sydney Olympics and won a gold medal in the 470 class. So that's, I guess, the combination of my sailing career, which had a long period before that, and now it seems almost a longer period after that of transitioning from being, a full-time professional sailor at the Sydney Olympics through to some keel boats and now working in the events game. So actually running events in the sailing world, which is an interesting thing to be doing at the moment. So I started sailing like many people at 6, 7 years old in Tasmania. My father built our first sabo in the garage and pretty much pushed my sister and I out into it and kept going ever since.
Yeah, okay, great. So you started sailing originally in Tasmania. Tell us about your journey, kind of your younger years, your journey through from being 6 or 7 in your homemade sabo through to the Olympics.
I guess I was really lucky. I grew up in a sailing family, so my grandfather sailed, my dad sailed, so I don't think I had any choice. I was going to sail because with Dad spending so much time at the yacht club, the easiest way for him to, I guess, get my sister and I out from under his feet was to build us a boat, which he did. And I basically sailed the sabo as a lot of people do through those junior years, and loved it. I guess it was what we did as a family. So all of our summer holidays were based around travelling to the national championships. So those early years, it was probably more because the parents wanted to travel to the national championships with their group of friends. And then it sort of developed, well, start performing and doing well. And then you start driving your parents to sort of say, take me to Queensland or take me to Bowen or South Australia where the national championships are. So I started in Tasmania at Port Dalrymple Yacht Club, so a little yacht club on the Tamar River, just north of Launceston. Great little place. But then the family moved to Melbourne when I was 10. So pretty much most of my sailing career has been Melbourne-based. So Melbourne is my home and my home yacht clubs. So I transitioned from the sabo, won a national championships in sabos, and then moved to the 420s. Loved the whole 420 thing, and I guess always had in the back of my head that Olympics was something that I was aspiring to go to, but I probably didn't have a plan. So went to uni, finished uni, started work, and pretty much at that point, 23, 24 years old, realised that if I didn't do this Olympic journey now, I'd get to 30 years old or 35 and regret the fact of not trying. So obviously knew and looked up to a lot of Olympic sailors that I'd sailed with at Black Rock Yacht Club and Tom King and others, and thought, well, this is my chance to actually do that. So then the next phase of my life was that, I guess, Olympic journey for 8 years, I guess.
Okay, so 8 years, you must have, you don't start with the Olympics as your first major event. Well, how did you kind of, when you decided to go down that Olympic journey specifically, what did you do? What was your kind of plan, or what were the events that you did?
I was lucky. So in the classes, so the junior and youth classes leading up to it, so I won national championships in sabos, and then the same in 420s. And I guess the 420 class was my first experience at travelling overseas. So going and competing in world championships in England, those sort of experiences really got me hooked. So I and did quite well. So I guess was on the radar of wasn't Australian sailing at that point. It was what was it called? Yachting Australia. So I was on the radar, I guess, as being identified as a potential sort of pathway. So I tried lasers for a little bit. Didn't enjoy that because there was too much hiking. So I stuck with the planing classes. So I did the 420 thing, but pretty much sailing went on hold for about 2 years when I finished uni and went to work. And when was it? It was immediately after the 96, so the Atlanta Olympics. So Tom King and Owen McMahon sailed in the 470 class. And they were the first male 470 sailors from Australia to even qualify since I think it was probably 84. I've even been 1980. So in the 470 class, Australia, like we all think that we're this amazing sailing nation, and we are at Olympics and America's Cup now, but back leading into the Sydney Olympics, so around 96, we hadn't actually won a gold medal for 28 years. So we'd grown up sailing, aspiring to go to the Olympic Games, but had a long way to go. So Tom finished his Olympic campaign in 96 with Owen and basically gave me a call. I'd pretty much grown up with Tom. He sailed mirrors, I sailed sabos, so we sort of had parallel paths. So we attended a lot of the same coaching clinics, but never actually competed against each other, which was probably a good thing because we hadn't developed any rivalry. He could win his Australian Championship and I could win mine, and we'd both be happy. So then Tom gave me a call and said, well, Mark, you're probably thinking about organising your own Olympic campaign. How about we team up and see how it goes? And I jumped at it. I'd never crewed before. I'd only had skippered boats. I think I'd put on a trapeze harness once or twice to jump on a little flying ant boat at like a sailing camp. And so I put on the trapeze harness. I was better body shape, so I was like 6'1" and skinny. The typical, and you had Will on the show last week. So you can see there's definitely a body type for 470 sailors. First, you have to be skinny and lightweight, and the crew has to be a bit tall. It always helps. So we started.
Your leverage when you're trapeze.
And every Olympic class is like that because it's so focused that each class dictates the body type of the person going into it. So 470s, it's all about lightweight. So Tom and I started in 96. We were good in Australia, but we turned up at our first World Championships that year, would have been 97, and we came something like 42nd. So that was pretty much, and that was still the best Australian. So we started effectively at 40th in the world and really only had 3 years to get there because although going to the Olympics is a worthwhile ambition, it wasn't, you're putting your whole life on hold, so it was never the goal. It was always, well, I don't see why we couldn't win. Tom was probably a bit more jaded or experienced, so he knew how hard it was. Whereas I came in expecting or thinking there's absolutely no reason that we shouldn't win. That if we do the work, we're the right size, body type, if we can get the right support behind us, sort of went into it naively going, well, 3 years, yep, we can do this. So that started, I guess, 3 years of full-time sailing with Tom. And I guess the biggest thing that happened to us was that Victor Kovalenko came along as the Australian coach at that same time. So him coming to Australia, us joining together, has pretty much continued Victor's sort of legacy right through to Tokyo now. So yeah, it's good to know what we were a part of way back in 96 is that success in the 470s is still continuing.
Yeah, and so you did then this 8-year program, you said it was, to the Olympics?
4 years in the 470
Okay.
And after Sydney, I continued in the 49er for another 4 years.
All right. Okay. And so 4 years to get into the Olympics, and then it was your first Olympics, wasn't it? And come out with a gold. I mean, that's pretty amazing. How did that feel to win golds in Australia?
It's surreal. Like you plan and prepare for 4 years, and most people it's longer than that. It's like 8 years, or for this 1 week in September in our case. So everything you do for 4 years is focused on one regatta. But to get to that regatta, you have to go through all these steps and stages. So as I sort of said, we started off good sailors, but on the world level, not in the picture. So we had to learn, I guess, our craft. Victor came on as the coach and set up a bit of a squad structure, so that there was a squad of Australian 470 sailors in the men's and females that were all based in Sydney, all fighting for Victor's attention first, and also then fighting for selection. So Tom, having been on the circuit Tom had probably been on the circuit for 6 years, maybe 8 years before that. It was a good stepping point, but we had a lot of work to do. It was interesting that when Victor came on board, Victor in his way basically said in 4 years' time, you guys will be the fastest boat in the world, you'll be the highest upwind. And we always thought that, initially we thought that Victor must have the secret magic numbers or a special set of sails or mast or boat that suddenly we would have access to. But the reality was that over those 4 years, he taught us how to sail properly. He took us from being good sailors who enjoyed it to being professional, and the trick was, I guess, we sailed, the equipment we were given more accurately than anyone else in the world at that time. So we were faster than every other boat. So we got to Sydney and we were winning regattas and we were fast. And if you're fast, tactics, everything else becomes pretty easy as long as you're fast. So we spent 4 years trying to get fast.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, it's a similar thing. It sounds similar to something Will said last week as well. It's that speed and always the continual focus on the speed. And one of the questions I asked him, so I'll ask you as well. You might have seen I was in the audience last week instead of interviewing, because I had an issue with my dog, which was luckily, for anyone watching who was on last week, it was sorted. He's all fine. But yeah, I asked Will about the speed and how do you identify if you're slow, and how do you, there's different levels obviously, and sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's maybe less so. How do you identify that, and how do you work on continually improving that speed?
For us, it was just hard work. You have to figure that by the time everyone's doing an Olympic campaign, natural talents are given. Like, to do an Olympic campaign, you've done a lifetime of sailing to get to that point. So everyone's good. The fleet's full of world champions, world youth champions. Everyone knows how to sail. But in sailing, if you are fast, you're a tactical genius. The rest of your life becomes much easier. So, and it's that mix of the person element, so training yourself and your body to be more accurate in the boat, put more of your own energy into the mechanism of the sails and the rig and the hull and the foils, and also the combination of equipment, which unless you have the best equipment, you're not going to win. So there's that two parallel streams that you spend a lot of your time developing your sails and your boat and your equipment, but at the same time you spend an equal amount of time, if not more, developing yourself and the teamwork. And how we did it leading into Sydney was, I think it's one of the advantages of being Southern Hemisphere based or based in Australia, that we got to sail 12 months of the year because we had our summer and the European summer. A lot of the top teams do sail 12 months of the year and they come to Australia anyway, but it was our nature. So we spent a lot of time really from December to March in the year of the game, so 99 into 2000, and in fact every year, just working on speed. So we would spend hours. So we'd sail 6 days a week normally. We'd do 3 days on, 1 day off, 4 days on, 1 day off in a rolling cycle. And a large part of that was just speed work. Some parts of it was putting up new sails and seeing if that felt quicker or slower. But most of it was technique based, going out the heads and practicing in the waves and kinetics and rocking and pumping and ooching. That after the summer in Sydney, we basically would go to Europe and we were blindingly fast. But our race skills weren't first race, right? So we'd end up at the first regatta in the European summer and be really quick because we were sailing the boat really accurately, but our race skills were rusty. And then we'd go through the European summer and our race skills would get sharpened up by the more and more racing, but your speed drops because suddenly you're focusing more on the skill of the racing than the speed. And then you take a break and focus on speed for maybe 2 weeks straight. And then you'd find that speed again. And so getting that mix of, because you have to have both. You have to be really sharp and you have to be fast, and timing it that you've got both of those at a world championship or at the Olympic trials or the Olympic Games, I think is the key. And Victor was really good at making a 3-year journey to peak at that one point.
Yeah, to keep. And it seems like, especially with so much time just focusing on speed, it'd be easy to kind of lose your focus a little bit, or maybe lose some kind of motivation after a period of time. And I'm throwing in a few curveball questions to Mark here that he isn't prepared for, but I always like to do this. But so, I mean, what kind of things do you do to kind of, how do you keep your motivation going when it's your 20th day off and maybe out and focusing on speed and kind of doing the same thing?
Yeah, for us, I think we were lucky in one way that we only had 3 years. Most Olympic campaigns are a 2 Olympic cycle, so you might start 8 years before, knowing full well that you're not going to make your first Olympics and your goal is the second Olympics. We didn't have that, so Sydney was our goal. So that meant that every training session was important. We knew that we were already short on time, so we'd be playing catch up, and that probably we'd be going into the Olympic year, even if everything was to plan, probably 6 months behind. So it is tough. So I think looking at it nowadays, so with Will and Matt in the 470s, they have to find other avenues to keep themselves entertained or at least sane. So whether that's sailing a moth or keel boats, because you spend your whole life working, living, effectively sleeping in the same hotel room as your skipper or crew.
Yeah. It's
really easy to, the little things can start getting annoying because you are just spending so much time with that person. Yeah. So the breaks were important. And I don't know if it was by design or good luck, but in our case with Tom and I, Victor, the coach, sometimes became that pressure relief valve that both Tom and I could focus our frustration on the coach. That we were both equally frustrated that he was making us do all this. He was the one making us uncomfortable. He was the one to blame, so we didn't blame each other. And I think that kept us as a good team, but also that time apart. So like Matt and Will are different people. Tom and I are different people. So in between regattas, sometimes you have to do different things. When you fly to Europe, probably the last person you want to sit next to on the plane is the person you're sitting next to on the boat all the time. So you're not being rude, you're just sitting somewhere else on the plane because you just need time away.
It's like your partner. Sometimes, you're like, I love you, but I need my own time. So
exactly. So we spend a lifetime together compressed into 4 years and have a real sort of brother type relationship. So people say, oh, good mates, is he your best friend? It's like, no, Tom and I are more like we're brothers because we've grown up together than best friends. And I think you can be more honest with your family than you can with your friends.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, a bit of a common enemy there in the coach, but sounds like it was a good enemy to have because he obviously took you guys through to the golden in Sydney. So, and then afterwards, you said you transitioned into the 49er for a few years. What was the decision around that?
Partially 2 reasons. So Tom had already done effectively 3 Olympic campaigns and gone to 2. So I think Sydney was always his final one. The success we had in Sydney was amazing. So to finish it there for me would have been to finish prematurely. And to do an Olympic campaign as a gold medalist or as a medalist is a different experience than doing an Olympic campaign as an up-and-coming. Mm-hmm. So, however, I was probably over the dieting. So being a 470 sailor, you're just not eating anything. So you live on coffee and salad. And you always have that struggle of keeping the weight down. For me, winning in Sydney meant that I could tick that box and so job done, time for a new challenge. And the 49er class was really attractive. So I moved into the 49er, so skipper the 49er with one of my best friends down here, Nick Partridge, who sailed America's Cups, and we sailed 420s together when we were 18 years old. And had always talked about that when we grow up, we'll do an Olympic campaign together. So we actually rejoined together after he'd done some America's Cup and I'd done 1 Olympics. But unfortunately, a pretty good sailor, Chris Nicholson, was sailing the 49ers at the time. Okay. And he beat us. We spent 4 years trying to get to his level and we didn't. So it was frustrating in a way. And would have loved to have gone to a second Olympics. But the journey of those 4 years was amazing. But it was easy to take because we were beaten by the better team. So it wasn't like we had a hard luck story or deserved to go because there was a better team there that deserved to go. So Chris went to Athens in the 49er instead of us. Okay.
And that happens in sailing, doesn't it? I mean, even, like you said, better team, as you said, took it. But it's so easy just to have a bad regatta or something, and
and it's
have to live with that. So
it's a tough one to take because sometimes you just have to go, well, that boat, that team is better on the day. They've done more work, more training, and they deserve to win. So obviously, not everyone can win, and That's a bit I sometimes find frustrating about sailing now. So if I go sailing on a keelboat without having done the preparational work, you don't deserve to win. And it is actually frustrating.
Yeah, no, that's very true, actually. And so then you transitioned out into more of a business kind of role and eventually into running your own sailing events company. What kind of inspired you to want to go into the event management side of things?
So my work background was project management in construction, so building. But I retired after 2004, and fortunately, the Volvo Ocean Race had been secured to come to Melbourne for the summer of 2005-06, and so I was picked up to be the operations director for the Melbourne stopover for that. So. Which was just a perfect fit. So it actually utilised all my sort of work background, but capitalised on my sailing experience. So that was for 3 years I worked on that project, which was really tough, but it was great because I knew the sailors and the skippers involved. Most of the sailors doing the Volvo Ocean Race have done Olympic campaigns, so it was a really good to be still not sailing but really close to the sport. That finished, I then went back to the construction sort of project management, but after a couple of years there was the opportunity to start an event management company, so it started a company called NewTac Events, and we ran at that time what was Audi Victoria Week or Scandi Geelong Week, which is now Festival of Sales down in Geelong. And that event is actually more about the 100,000 general public who come for the fireworks and the 60 bands and something like 30 different food vendors that are all alongside the sailing regatta.
Yeah, okay.
But then, so my company, NewTac, probably goes into the field of yacht clubs are extremely good at running races and the bar and looking after their members. Often where they can struggle or need assistance with is when you try to take sailing beyond that to the general public. So whether you're running an event outside of the yacht club in the public domain, or media marketing, or attracting events. So I spend a lot of my time now working with state governments in Victoria to attract and secure events to come to Victoria. So part of that Sail Melbourne, so I've been the event director for Sail Melbourne probably for 8 years, whilst it was the Sailing World Cup. And so it's always trying to look at new events that should come to this part of the world. So we're, last year we were really successful and had 8 of the 10 Olympic classes all had their World Championships in Melbourne.
Amazing.
So we put that under the banner of the Summer of Sailing. So it was not just Sail Melbourne, but it was a whole summer of regattas from Geelong to Sorrento to Brighton. So so NewTAC, I look at watch a lot of people sailing and actually do very little sailing myself. And I guess the latest thing that NewTAC is doing, which I think is the future of what I want to be doing, is we've launched the Sailing Champions League.
Yes. Yes, and we will get into that in a sec, because I do have just one question about, when you're talking about especially Geelong and the other events, is kind of expanding these sailing events out to the general public. And this is one thing that I've kind of heard, talked about before, and as a way to, first of all, get more money out of the sailing events, as we know sailing needs that, but also to kind of bring other people into the whole sailing environment, even if they're not sailing. I mean, do you have any thoughts around, I guess, that, or even a couple tips for clubs or for people who are putting on sailing events, is how you can get more people involved, either from a social aspect or even somehow draw them into the sailing as well?
It's difficult. So at the Olympic level of our sport, it's so focused and it's all about the competitors. So Sail Melbourne and all the other international events and world championships, when you run those, the focus is on the sailors because they're on a journey for 4 years culminating to Tokyo. So they are so focused that it's not their job to actually try to grow the sport or take what they're doing to the general public. That's, I guess, what the yacht clubs and federations and events do. But then the other side of the sport is the mass participation side, the keelboats, the club sailing, Volvo Ocean Race, where there's elite sailors, but sailing is really on show to a wider audience of non-sailors. So the Festival of Sails in Geelong is a really good example. It's been going for 176 or maybe 177 years. So it's got this amazing long history. It's the oldest sporting event in Victoria. It's older than the America's Cup and Melbourne Cup horse race. And the great thing about that event is sailing gets exposed to about 100,000 general public who come for the festival. Not many of those come to watch yacht racing, but they come for the food, the drink, the atmosphere, the bands, and sailing is quite, it's a very niche thing. So they come to they're a bit quizzical. They sort of pop their head into the yacht club and sort of wonder what's happening, wonder if they're allowed to come in. And events like Festival of Sails in Geelong, basically the first thing they do is open up all the gates and put a massive welcome sign. So it's actually about getting the general public into the yacht club and breaking down the barriers. And yes, you can easily spot the sailors. They're the ones who are all sort of scruffy and salty and red eyes from sailing all day and probably drinking rum. But the sailors stand out, but it's quite amazing that they're actually the entertainment for a lot of people. So people come down and want to see. The challenge is trying to get the sailing close to shore or in a way that actually is friendly or easy to explain to the general public. Because at Festival of Sails, people come to the shorefront, they sit there, they'll have a drink, they'll look at a large screen and want to see something. It's then up to us to explain what it is they're seeing. And it's not about trying to turn them into sailors or signing up there. It's a slow process of, if they think it's interesting, maybe they'll come back next year. if their kids then start pestering them to do a TACA's program. So it has to be, I think, a soft sell, that you're not trying to sign them up to be a yacht club member the first time they walk through the gate. But
yeah, absolutely.
clubs passes offer the opportunity for them to take the next step, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like the inspiration and kind of even just for somebody to be able to stick their head in and say, oh, well, what's this all about? You know, how do you get involved is really great. And I know, you know, even through my cell, I've had chats to some of our members who have said, oh, I saw, you know, I was re-inspired. I was down in Hobart, and so I saw this, and so I went online and I found this, and you know, and one guy in particular I'm thinking of did Hobart this year, and he had gotten some inspiration from being part of, you know, if you've done Sydney Hobart, you've been down there. It's a great atmosphere, and so many people come down and walk the docks and stuff like that. So just being able to bring people in, I think, like you're doing with Geelong and some of those events, is a really amazing way to kind of bring new people into sailing.
Yeah.
And we have a question here from Brian, so I'll just read it out. Hi, Mark. Not everyone can represent Australia at the Olympics, but so often the youth are inspired by Olympic success in swimming, athletics, etc. How can Australia's sailing tap into this social psyche and attract youth to sailing given limited media coverage?
It's a good one, because we've had success at Olympic level now for 20 years. So from Sydney onwards, we've won gold medals, and we're one of the most successful sports in Australia at winning gold medals, but we are not successful at all in capitalising and turning that into more kids, and not just kids, but more adults, more people sailing. The sailors, the sailors have one job to do, which is perform, and so I can really accept the fact that they have to be selfish sometimes, and I use the word selfish, and it's probably focused. Doing an Olympic campaign, it allows you to see the world in black and white. Like, if something doesn't help you win a gold medal, you don't do it. Mm-hmm. So it's really good. It's a great way to live life, that you can just go yes, no, and you can be, I'll say selfish, but the most focused person around, because you've got a goal and everyone supports you in that. So it's up to, I guess, but having said that, a lot of what the current sailors do on social media and pumping out videos is fantastic. So that gets to a certain market. But to be honest, a lot of people who watch that social media probably are already interested in sailing. So the hard bit is, how do you get that to the non-sailors? And that's where the mainstream media comes in. So trying to get into the newspapers and onto the weather crosses, and onto the TV is the bit that we really struggle with as a sport. Because once people come down to a yacht club or get on a boat, they're amazed, and they're just blown away by the experience that we get to do every week. Or not at all now, but when we get back sailing again, it's just getting them there. So it's, in my opinion, it's not focusing on the small number, but just exposing sailing to as many eyes as possible. And so that's the value of the Sydney and Hobart start to the sport of sailing, is just immense. The fact that's like a tradition, that Australia sits down and watches the Sydney and Hobart start. And yes, that doesn't relate to 99% of other people sailing watching 100-foot maxi go at the heads. It at least gets people interested in, what else is there? That's the challenge, I think, for the Volvo Ocean Race, or the Ocean Race and America's Cup, that the reality is they're big sporting events, but they're big to us, not to everyone else. So, yeah.
And that's a good point, but I think the Sydney Hobart is probably a bit different than Volvo Ocean Race America's Cup, in the way that those are really elite events. There's very few people who are ever going to be able to do them. Whereas Sydney Hobart, you can come into sailing later in life, and you can definitely aspire to do that. So it's the type of thing that anyone who has the interest can aspire to do, and it is achievable. So that's a really good one, just to kind of, as an example, to get people interested in sailing in a way that they can say, well, this is, to me, something I can look up to and that I'd be really interested to do, but it's actually achievable as well. So
and definitely too, like, it has all those messages of freedom and adventure and danger, that a lot of other sports don't have, unless you're rock climbing or doing something extreme.
Yeah.
Sailing has these really quite extreme elements to it. But I think it's and I keep calling it a sport, but for most people, sailing is a leisure activity. It's a hobby. We're probably closer to fishing than we'd like to admit. That people go fishing not to win trophies. They go fishing for their own mental health. Half the time they probably don't eat the fish they catch. Sailing, I think most people sail because they just like sailing. They like being out on the water on a boat. And sometimes whether it's a sailboat or a powerboat probably doesn't matter. But yeah, I think the bigger market for sailing is actually those who don't treat it as a sport but treat it as a lifestyle or a hobby and just sail for pleasure. Because that's not everyone can win. And it gets expensive too if you try to win. But yeah, everyone can just go sailing and just for that a mental break. To actually,
yeah, that's right.
People go and play golf so they can be away from the family for 5 hours. There's probably a lot of people who do the same for sailing. It's their escape.
Yeah, and that's so true. I've heard it so much right now as well. People and the camaraderie in the community and just losing their sailing. It isn't just, oh, I don't get to sailing, woe is me. It is a big part of people's kind of mental health and keeping, themselves sane, for lack of other words. So yeah, that is a really big part of it. And it doesn't have to be expensive as well, just for those watching who think that, you need lots of money to go sailing. I was saying to Mark before we started, I picked up a laser this last weekend for $300. Yeah. So that will get me back out on the water and I'm very excited. And also you can just, join a club and go sailing with other people. So it's really just the same as kind of joining a football team or something like that from a cost point of view. And talking about participation, I think it's a good time to kind of transition into Mark's other initiative that he has on at the moment, which is the Sailing Champions League. And what I was going to do is start by just playing a short video to show people about that. So why don't I turn the video on now, and then we'll ask Mark some questions about the Sailing Champions League.
Great, thanks. This is the first step, I guess, on the way to the Sailing Champions League Asia Pacific Final. And then the top Asian, the top Pacific and the top Australian teams from that event qualify for the World Championships, which are in Porto in Sardinia.
Yeah, so we ranged from 14 to 23. Surprisingly, we did really well and our boat handling came together miraculously. It's just a big skiff essentially, so I think we pulled it together in the end.
Yeah.
So Mark, tell us about the Sailing Champions League.
Oh, sounds like we're straight into the next video. So Sailing Champions League, it actually goes back about 8 years in Europe, but the concept of it is it's a club versus club competition. So in sailing, traditionally, people often just sail for themselves. So a boat owner owns the boat. They might sail at a particular club, but most of the time they're sailing for individual glory. Then at the Olympic and international level, you might sail for your country. But there isn't really, and it's pretty unique in that sailing, unlike most sports, it's a club versus club. So in football, rugby, soccer, you're actually competing for your club, and your club gets behind you and supports their team, and the best athletes or best sailors at that club then go on to represent that club against the club down the road or the club overseas to prove that they're better than the club down the road. But sailing's, especially in Victoria, especially in Australia, has been missing that. And we've sort of surprised that it's also been missing that internationally. About 8 years ago, the Bundesliga started in Germany, which, so Ollie and Marcus over in Germany, ex-Olympic sailors, came up with the concept of this club versus club competition. And it's not match racing or teams racing, it's in small boat, in fleet racing. So take the sailing that everyone does every week, but condense it and take the best things of match racing and teams racing, so really short, sharp races, umpires out there, so there's no protests, what happens on the water stays on the water, and do 10-minute races, but not just do 2 or 3 of them a day, we were doing 20, I think it was the most we've done is 27 in a day. So, and create a league of clubs. So you get your clubs that might just be 5 kilometres down the road from each other. They enter a team in the sailing league, and they get to compete on a level playing field to become the best club in their region, and then become the best club in Australia, and then become the best club in the world. And the thing that the Sailing Champions League does is it provides a level playing field. So it's not about which club has the biggest marina or the most money and the best boats and coaches and facilities. The smallest dinghy club, as long as they've got 4 sailors, and those 4 sailors are better than 4 sailors from another club, they can turn up in supplied equipment, step on the boat and win. So this had been started in Germany 8 years ago. Now there's 23 different leagues around the world. So 19 of those are all in Europe still. So pretty much every country in Europe has a sailing league where the best, or all the clubs from that country race against each other. Then the winners from each of those national leagues goes up to effectively a world championship to be the best club in Europe, as it was. So 2 years ago, we thought that is something that Australia needed. We thought that we need to bring that event to Australia. So Howard Elliott, who's from Sydney, and I have teamed up to bring the Sailing Champions League Asia Pacific to our part of the world. And we've rolled it out, started last year, and launched with, the plan was, until the coronavirus came along, that we would run a full season with a qualifying event in Victoria that was during the Festival of Sails, the qualifying event in New South Wales, which was from that video, and then the top 6 teams from that event, the top 6 from the Victorian event, 6 clubs from Asia and 6 clubs from the Pacific, so 2 from the islands and 4 from New Zealand, would all come together, and there was going to be a Sailing Champions League final at Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron, that then the best 3 teams, so the best Asian club, the best Pacific club and the best Australian club, all went over to Europe to take on the world's best. So it's about, it's about identifying, providing a league structure that any club in our region in Australia can enter and submit a team to, and provide an avenue for, it's probably not for their junior or youth sailors, it's more for the 20 to 30-year-old sailors. So often junior and youth sailing can be quite parent-driven and parent-funded, but it's when a sailor gets to 19 years old, they're not on the Olympic pathway, they have to make the decision of, they're at university, sailing can get a bit more expensive if they need to buy their own boats. This is a way that those really exceptional sailors can stay at their club and represent their club by simply just turning up. So so we've we've invested in a fleet of 6 RS21 boats, so a new design out of the UK, which are really cool, fast little boats for either 4 or up to 5 people, and launched those boats over the summer. So now bunkered down, planning for next year, how we can actually go from a handful of clubs racing this year to getting every club in Australia engaged and involved and following and hopefully entering.
Okay. And you mentioned the youth sailors, but that it's for kind of all ages. I understand that there's 3 different divisions. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So even at our events that we've had so far, the oldest sailor we had was 83. So we had a female 83-year-old sailor skippering a boat from South Australia, representing Royal South Australian Yacht Squadron, down to an optimist, Matt Goss, who's 15 or 14. He was one of the crews. So it's not restrictive to anyone, but I guess the target age is that 19 to 35-year-old. However, if the best sailors from a club happen to be Etchell sailors or keelboat sailors, they jump on board. And then we do have 3 divisions. So there's the open division, which is anyone. There's the women's division, obviously, and then the youth division, to sort of encourage those streams. And I think we need to support, especially the women's, like this concept. Hopefully will be very appealing that we can actually grow more women's participation at a high level through this. So we're optimistic, sort of hoping that we might be able to kick things off again in September, but just planning things at the moment.
Yeah, okay. And when you're talking about participation on those different divisions, how old do you have to be in the qualify for the youth division?
The youth is under 21.
Okay.
Which I think is better than under 19 or under 18, because then it tends to cut out a whole lot of people. And that lines up with the under 21 that they use in Europe.
Okay.
And basically the youth teams can have 5 people on board, whereas an open team can only have 4 people on board.
Right. And the women's teams can have 5? Yes,
and the women's teams can have 5. And every team has to have 1 female sailor on board too. So even the open division, we'd love to think that it's actually 50-50 mix. And I think that's how it should be, that every team ideally would be 50-50.
Yeah.
But let's start by saying, no, every club in Australia, if they can't find 1 female sailor to represent their club, I don't think that's a problem with the format of the event. I think that club needs to look at itself and go, why don't we have a female sailor?
And what kind of mix have you had in your events last year when it looks like between the open and the women's and the youth?
We've had a good range. So last year, the team that won last year was Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron, and that was skippered by David Chapman, who I think probably most people in Sydney know. Exceptional sailor who sails a lot of sports boats, match racing, teams racing. So initially the concept was dominated by Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron, CYCA, who have youth foundations that do this stuff, and they get a lot of kids sailing keelboats. However, this is actually more for the clubs that don't have those, not those big clubs. So it's more for the clubs that don't have existing youth academies or fleets of Elliott Sevens themselves. This can be their pathway. So a good example is Hunters Hill. A dinghy club has embraced the event wholeheartedly because they see this is perfect for their dinghy sailors who might be sailing a 49 or 420 or 29er. They don't have to leave the club to continue their sailing and go to a big keelboat club. They can actually stay at their club and continue sailing these things. So we've had Optimist sailors, Olympic sailors, Ollie Trudell. We've had America's Cup sailors. All these people have retired, so they're not current. So we're not really targeting the current Olympians because they're too busy trying to win gold medals. This is for the people who aren't Olympic sailors, but they're actually really good sailors, or maybe they're retired sailors who come back to competitive sailing through this, or they're Etchell sailors or they're keelboat sailors. So yet to see what type of sailor wins, but my gut feeling is that the young up-and-coming sailors should be the ones that win this sort of thing because they're hungry and they're exceptional.
Okay, and what kind of, so you've mentioned a lot of the kind of ex-Olympics, professional sailors and stuff coming back to this. Is that your expectation when a club's putting together a team? What's kind of your expectation for the level of skills that the sailors are going to have?
Yeah, definitely not. So it's open to club level sailors. So these boats, the RS21, are designed to be club boats. So they are just a big dinghy, so they're not intimidating. They're fast and light and fun. So basically anyone who can sail, anyone who can sail can actually compete in these boats. The competition side probably comes from who is the best sailors at their club. Mm-hmm. So I think the first step, especially in the big clubs, is to work out how do they compare a keelboat sailor to a dinghy sailor. Mm-hmm. Do they run a trials, or how do they do that, or do they just nominate it and just send two teams? Mm. So at this point, as I said, we had 83-year-old female skipper from South Australia last time, Olympic America's Cup, but most of the sailors are club level, and it also appeals to people probably my generation. So I'm 45, so I look back on the days when all my mates, we used to sail dinghies and loved it, grew up in the sport. And so a couple of my mates also got boats and turned up at the event as effectively a privateer team. Okay. And just had a ball because it was sailing how they used to. They sail big keelboats now, but this was actually short, sharp, fun racing, how they used to do it back when they were young.
And so how about a lot of people who are club sailors may have come into it as an adult and not sailed dinghies before. If somebody who's a keelboat sailor and doesn't have that dinghy experience, would they be comfortable enough stepping into these smaller boats, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, because what you learn on the big keelboat, these are just either a small keelboat or a big dinghy. Yeah, okay. They actually fit nicely into that, so either group can do it, and either group brings their own skills to it. It's quite interesting watching the dinghy sailors step into these boats. They didn't even know how to rig the boats up. Like it's okay. Actually the skills that they're missing, like the reefing of the sails and the spinnaker. We had laser sailors competing in this. They had to learn all about jibing astrometrical spinnakers. Because the keelboat sailors step on board and they're fully aware of the teamwork side of it. So everyone having a role on the boat. So if there's 4 people on the boat, everyone doing their job and working as a team. So it's sort of working quite well. I think a good mix is old keelboat and dinghy sailors to bring that mix to it. And I think with 4 people on a boat, that could happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so you mentioned as well about the kind of short, sharp racing and the courses. Tell us a little bit more about what types of courses do you run? How do those races run? How does that work?
Cool. So the format of the event is there's 6 boats and up to 24 teams. And so in any one race, there's 6 boats racing against each other. And the races are really simple, windward-leeward. So basically they do 2 laps, small start line up to the windward mark, through the gate at the bottom, back up to the windward mark and back down to the finish. And those races are 10 minutes. So there's not even time to think or worry. So by the time you started, you're halfway up the first beat. By the time you pull the kite up, you have to get ready for your jibe. And by the time you jibe, you have to get ready for the drop. So it's really intense racing. And it also means that speed isn't the number one factor. Unlike Olympic sailing and elite sailing, where it's all about getting that fraction of a centimetre, this is about boat handling and having your head out of the boat to see where's wind going. So, and what side of the course do I want to go? Because you've only got one chance of making the right decision because it's over so quickly. So we have lots of these races up to the typical format is a 2-day event and up to 45 races over 2 days.
Wow.
So the majority of it is qualifying, and then at the end of qualifying, so on the Sunday afternoon, the top 4 boats then go to a knockout final series. Okay. and it's the interesting part there is that the boat that was leading after the qualifying carries through one first place, and then the winner of the regatta is the first team to get 2 first places. So it does mean that whoever wins the last race of the day wins the regatta, which from an explanation point of view and a media point of view makes it really simple. So basically top 4 go through to a final, and whoever wins 2 races is the champion.
Yeah. And that's how a lot of sports are run, like you said, of people who are used to watching sports on TV, that's something that makes sense to them. So it's interesting, to have a different format. And so there's up to 24 teams and 6 boats. So sailors just rotate in and out throughout the day. Is that how it works?
Yeah, there's a team of ribs that just swap the sailors on and off the boats.
Right.
So they don't sail the same boat too often. They just rotate.
Okay, right. So then your equipment really isn't kind of a factor in this, because everyone's using the same equipment and you're actually trading throughout the day. So it's not like somebody has a better boat, they're going to win.
No, exactly. So we supply everything. The sailors just turn up with their gloves and their sailing gear and the produce fleet, and that's pretty much it.
And how about training? So if people don't have access to these boats outside of the actual events, is there any kind of training or preparation beforehand?
So for the events we've done so far, we've done 2 days prior to the event, offered the teams competing effectively 2-hour windows that they can come and train in the boats, just so that teams that have never sailed together before can actually come and meet sometimes and then actually learn how to sail the boats. But the plan is that these 6 boats that we have now will be based in Melbourne. So they will become a Melbourne-based fleet. So for clubs in Melbourne to come to Rob Brighton and actually train and sail in this fleet, and also create a local league. So almost once a fortnight or once a month, clubs in Victoria all get together and do a competition against each other, which is part competition, but probably more training for the Champions League. Ideally, we'd love to set up a similar thing in Sydney, but that's a bit further down the track. So it's to give, because there's some clubs in Sydney that already have Elite Sevens and those teams can use those boats. But there's the majority of clubs don't own a fleet of boats themselves. So to provide a fleet of boats that any club on Sydney Harbour could book and use would actually be a goal that we're looking for.
Okay. And so if people are interested to participate, or so like if, an individual who's listening would like to get their club involved, or if a club would like to get involved, how do they do that?
The best way would be to go to the website. Sorry, I'm just, I think I'm still online. Yep. To go to the website or Facebook. So if they just Google Sailing Champions League Asia Pacific, it'll come up with the domain sailing hyphen slash, is it hyphen or slash? What is it? Sailing Champions League.
I can pop it into our Facebook page as well so people can see it. Yeah.
But search for it on Facebook or website. It's actually then about pestering your club. So if you're an individual who thinks that they want to sail in this, the first thing is contact us. We'll give you all the information, but then start speaking to your club and say, I want to represent my club in this event. The club hopefully is already aware of it because it's the club that puts the entries in. And if they're not, we'll pester them alongside you. So because we want, basically, there's 2 ways of doing this, either pushing up from the sailors level to get the sailors excited, which is what we have to do, but also getting the clubs and the committees and the Commodores to understand that there's a bit of status in this. So Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron won the event last year here in Sydney. They went over to St. Moritz in Switzerland and took on the best clubs in the world, which were mainly European based, and they won. So it was the first time that a non-European club had competed at the world level. Yeah. And for them to go over there and win was just amazing. So fantastic. It gave us legitimacy. We've always bragged that we've got the best sailors and the best clubs in the world. Yeah. And the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron proved it in the first year. So for a club like that, or for a Sand Canberra club, or Royal Freshwater Bay, to prove that they're up there on an international scale is important.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, look, there's no more questions in the chat. So just one more from me. And first of all, just like to thank you again for your time tonight. We've gone an hour now, so I'm sure we could keep chatting a lot longer, but people want to get back to their evenings at some point. So when do you expect to start again? And that's a hard question because no one knows what's happening, but...
Yeah, so right now my fleet of boats is locked away up at Woolwich Dock in the big shed next to Wild Oats and all the big mats. They look quite comical how small they are compared to those things. But the plan is to bring those back to Melbourne and relaunch in September. I think the sailing and every sport will start from a local level first. So that's how we have to start. So we'll start doing some local events at Brighton, then start expanding. Hopefully by February next year, we'll have what will be the southern states, so Tasmania, Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, to qualify for them, and then bring the boats back up to Sydney for the northern states qualifier and then the final. And then ideally also run an event in New Zealand and also in Asia, but we just sort of have to see how things pan out.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so we're looking at kind of later this year, getting back into the swings and qualifiers early next year.
Exactly. So we'll start, hopefully, we'll start pushing out some news about announcements about what next year will look like.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, again, thank you, Mark, so much for joining us. For anyone listening, if you're interested, Mark Turnbull, and go to Sailing Champions League Asia Pacific, and you can get in touch with Mark and find out how to get involved directly. And we'll have this video up on Facebook and stuff as well, so you can come back and listen to anyone who kind of maybe joined us a little bit later. So I'll see you guys all next week. And yeah, thanks again.
Okay. Thank you. See you.
Bye.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you'd like to know more about this program or the MySail app and community, head on over to mysail.team. That's MYSAIL.TEAM. Until next time, stay safe and happy sailing.